I was in the middle of parallel parking on the street outside my apartment when my phone lit up on the passenger seat. I glanced at it the way you do when you're half focused on something else. One eye on the rearview mirror, one eye on the screen. The name on the display stopped me cold. It was my accountant, Janet, not a text, a call. And then immediately after, a text that came through before I could even pick up. Do not go to that meeting today. Do not sign anything. Lock your door and call me back right now. I sat there with the engine still running, the car crookedly wedged between a pickup truck and a minivan, and I read those words 3 times. Janet was not a dramatic person. She was the kind of woman who communicated entirely in spreadsheets and bullet points. She had been doing my family's books for 11 years. She had never, not once in 11 years, sent me a message with anything remotely resembling urgency. I turned off the engine. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. "Where are you right now?" she asked. No greeting, no preamble. "Sitting in my car," I said. "What's happening?" There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear someone deciding exactly how much to say and in what order. Then Janet let out a slow breath and said, "I need you to come to my office. Not tomorrow. Right now. I found something in the quarterly filings that you need to see before you sit across a table from your brother today." I had been on my way to a meeting with my brother, Daniel. He had called it a strategic alignment session, his words to go over the restructuring proposal for Clover & Co., the specialty food company our parents had built from the ground up and left equally to the two of us when they passed 18 months ago. Daniel was 4 years older than me. He had always been the one who handled the face of things, the handshakes, the dinners, the investor calls. I had always been the one who handled the inside of things, the product development, the supplier relationships, the numbers. We had worked that way our whole lives, and it had functioned. Not warmly, not without friction, but it had functioned. The restructuring proposal had been his idea. He said the company needed to modernize, bring in outside capital, streamline the equity structure. He had sent me a 70-page document 2 weeks prior and told me to review it before today's meeting. I had reviewed it. Most of it made sense. Some of it gave me a low-grade unease I couldn't quite articulate. I had told myself I was being oversensitive, that I was still grieving, that I needed to trust my brother. I drove to Janet's office with the quiet, focused calm of someone who already suspects the world is about to tilt underneath them. She was waiting at the door when I arrived. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't ask how I was doing. She led me straight back to her desk and turned her monitor toward me. "I want you to look at this and tell me if you authorized it," she said. On the screen was an email, sent from my business address, dated 6 weeks ago, to a private equity firm called Trident Capital. The email stated that I, as co-owner of Clover & Co., was formally agreeing to a dilution of my equity stake from 50% to 15% in exchange for an undisclosed capital infusion. The language was precise and professional and completely devastating, and I had absolutely no memory of writing it. "That's not my email," I said. "I know," Janet said. "Look at the metadata." She clicked through to a technical view I wouldn't have known to look for on my own. The email had been composed from my account, yes, but it had been sent from a device I didn't own, a MacBook Air registered to a home address in the Riverside district, my brother Daniel's neighborhood. I felt the room go very still. "There's more," Janet said, and the gentleness in her voice made it worse. She walked me through it methodically, the way she walked me through tax documents, without editorializing, just point by point. Over the past 4 months, someone had accessed my business email through a shared administrative login that Daniel had set up during our parents' transition of ownership. A login I had forgotten existed, that I had never changed the password to, that he had apparently been using quietly and strategically. There were 3 additional emails sent from my account to various parties. One to our family's estate attorney suggesting I was open to a buyout, one to our largest wholesale client apologizing for what it called inconsistent decision-making on my end, and one to our board of 2 outside advisors, stating that I was considering stepping back from day-to-day operations for personal health reasons. "He's been building a paper trail," Janet said. "He's been using your own email address to make it look like you've been voluntarily stepping aside. And today's meeting, the restructuring proposal, that's the closing act. That document you reviewed, page 47, subsection C. It formalizes everything these emails set up. If you sign it, you walk away with 15% and no operational authority, and it would look completely consensual." I sat back in the chair. I was 31 years old. My parents had died 14 months apart, my father first from a heart attack, then my mother from what the doctors called grief and exhaustion, and the rest of us called a broken heart. They had spent 30 years building Clover & Co., from a single farmer's market booth into a regional brand with 18 employees and a distribution deal that covered 6 states. They had left it to Daniel and me in equal measure because they trusted us both, because they believed that together we would protect what they had made. And my brother had decided that equal was not enough. I didn't cry. I noticed that about myself with a kind of distant curiosity. I had cried for weeks after my mother died. I had cried at odd moments for months after in the cereal aisle, in the parking lot of the gym, once memorably at a stoplight while a particular song came on the radio. But sitting in Janet's office, looking at the methodical documentation of my brother's betrayal, I felt nothing that resembled grief. What I felt was a cold, clarifying focus. The same thing I felt when I was developing a new product and hit a formulation problem. Not panic, just the desire to understand the exact nature of the obstacle so I could work around it. "Does he know you found this?" I asked. "No," Janet said. I flagged it because one of the Trident emails was CC'd to a distribution address I didn't recognize. I traced it back to a domain connected to a holding company registered in Daniel's wife's name. His wife, Lauren. I had always found Lauren difficult to read, pleasant on the surface, strategic underneath. The kind of person who asked questions at family dinners that felt like information gathering disguised as interest. She had been the one to push the hardest for the restructuring. She was the one who had introduced Daniel to Trident Capital. She was the one who had suggested, gently and repeatedly over the past 6 months, that maybe I needed to take some time to focus on myself, that the pressure of running a company while grieving was clearly taking a toll on me, that no one would think less of me for stepping back. I hadn't understood at the time that she was narrating a story, not to me, to everyone else. I asked Janet to print everything, all of it, the emails, the metadata, the login records, the Trident correspondence, the holding company registration. She printed 43 pages. I took them, folded them into a manila envelope, and drove home. I did not go to the meeting. Instead, I called my brother and told him I was running late, that I had a supplier emergency, that I would reschedule. His voice on the phone was the same voice it had always been, warm, slightly distracted, the voice of an older brother who had always moved through the world with the particular ease of someone who never doubted his own right to take up space. He said no problem. He said he would have his assistant send new availability. He said he hoped the supplier thing wasn't serious. I said it wasn't. I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours reading through Janet's 43 pages a second time and a third time, and then I opened my laptop and began building my own file. The administrative login that Daniel had been using was still active. I changed the password immediately. Then I pulled up the full login history for my business accounts, going back 12 months. Janet had caught 4 emails. I found 11. Some of them were small, minor repositioning of my positions on vendor contracts, a note to one of our outside advisors that I had delegated a decision to Daniel, a reply to a partnership inquiry that closed the door on an opportunity I would have pursued enthusiastically. Each individual action was subtle. As a pattern, they were surgical. He had been incrementally reducing my footprint in the company I co-owned and doing it in my own voice, with my own signature, so that by the time today's meeting happened, there was a months-long paper trail suggesting that stepping back had been my idea all along. It was meticulous. I could almost admire it if I separated myself completely from the fact that the person who had designed it was someone I had shared Thanksgiving tables with for 31 years. I was deep in the login records, cross-referencing timestamps against my actual calendar, when someone knocked on my front door. 3 quick, sharp raps. I checked the time. It was almost 7 in the evening. I hadn't noticed the daylight go. Through the peephole, I saw my nephew, Marcus. He was 17, Daniel and Lauren's son, and he was standing on my doorstep in a hoodie and jeans, no jacket, arms crossed over his chest in the way teenagers do when they're trying to hold themselves together. I opened the door. "She doesn't know I'm here," he said before I could speak. "Who doesn't know?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mom." He looked past me into the apartment, then back at me. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He came in and stood in my entryway, and I could see from the set of his jaw and the way he was blinking too much that he was either about to cry or working very hard not to. Marcus had always been a quiet kid, observant in the way that children who grow up in strategic households often are, learning early to read rooms before walking into them. I had always liked him. I had tried, over the years, to maintain a relationship with him that existed outside of the complicated gravity of his parents. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. He had a voice memo open. "I wasn't trying to listen," he said. "I was in my room. Their home office is right next to mine, and the walls they're not great. He pressed play. The audio quality was imperfect, the kind of muffled recording you get through drywall. But the voices were clear enough. Daniel's voice first, low and measured. The meeting got pushed. She says she has a supplier issue. It doesn't matter. Dragging this out a week changes nothing. The emails are locked in, the Trident term sheet is already initialed, and once she signs the restructure, we execute the secondary buyout clause. Then Lauren's voice, closer to the wall. What if she shows it to someone before she signs? A pause, and then Daniel again. She won't. She trusts Janet, and Janet doesn't know about the holding company. And even if she did figure something out, we have the emails. It looks like she decided this herself. Who's going to believe she didn't? The recording ended. Marcus lowered the phone. He was looking at the floor. I thought maybe you should know, he said. I know they're my parents, but he stopped. Started again. My grandfather built that company. My grandmother worked there until 2 months before she died. He shook his head. He couldn't finish the sentence. I sat down across from him at my kitchen table, in the same chair where I'd been sitting for the past 2 hours. I thought about what it must have cost this 17-year-old to get on his bicycle and ride across town to knock on a door he wasn't sure would open with anything other than complicated adult grief on the other side of it. You did the right thing, I said. Are you going to be okay? He asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it. I sent Marcus home before it got too late. I told him not to say anything, not to change his behavior in any way that his parents might notice. I told him I would handle it, and I told him that whatever happened between me and his parents, it had nothing to do with him, and I would make sure he understood that when this was over. He nodded and put his hoodie back up and walked out into the night looking older than he should have. Then I called Janet back. We talked until almost midnight. She connected me with a business litigation attorney named Graham, a former corporate fraud investigator who had pivoted to private practice and who, when I read him the metadata on the emails and described the holding company structure, said 4 words that settled something in my chest. This is very prosecutable. Over the next 10 days, I did not let on that anything had changed. I attended a routine vendor call with Daniel as though nothing had happened. I responded to Lauren's text about a family dinner with the same mild warmth I always did. I watched them move through the ordinary rhythms of our shared professional life, and I built my case with the quiet patience of someone who knows that the timer is running in their favor, not their opponents. What Graham uncovered went further than Janet's initial findings. The holding company Lauren had registered was the vehicle for a real estate investment she and Daniel had been planning to fund using the proceeds from my buyout. They had already made preliminary commitments to a development partner. They needed the Clover & Co. equity liquidation to close their position. And they needed it on a specific timeline because their development partner had a hard deadline. The restructuring meeting Daniel had called wasn't just opportunistic. It was urgent. He was the one under pressure, not me. Graham also found that several of the emails sent from my account had misrepresented material facts about the company's financial position, specifically one email to Trident Capital that had characterized a supply chain delay as evidence of my erratic operational decision-making. That characterization, combined with the forged implication of my consent, crossed from corporate manipulation into fraud territory. Graham was very calm when he explained this. He had the flat professional cadence of someone who had spent years describing bad behavior in legal terms. I asked him what our options were. He told me we had several. We could expose the scheme through the estate attorneys, effectively unwinding any commitments made through forged communications and protecting my ownership stake. We could pursue criminal referral for the fraud on the Trident correspondence. Or we could do both, in sequence, beginning with a move that I found elegantly appropriate given the circumstances. I agreed to reschedule the restructuring meeting. I let Daniel choose the date. I let Lauren send a confirmation text that I replied to with a cheerful thumbs-up emoji. I let them believe, for 10 more days, that everything was proceeding exactly as they had planned. The meeting was held at a downtown conference room Daniel had booked through a shared workspace. Professional, neutral ground his choice. He arrived looking polished and relaxed in the way people look when they believe the hard part is already done. Lauren was with him, which surprised me only slightly. She positioned herself as support, practical and pleasant, the kind of presence that softens a room without calling attention to itself. There was a notary waiting at the end of the table. I arrived with Janet and Graham. The expression that crossed Daniel's face when he saw Graham was almost imperceptibly brief, a flicker. The way a light sometimes dims for half a second before the power comes back on. Lauren's face didn't change at all, which was, I thought, more telling. We sat down. Graham placed a document on the table, not the restructuring proposal, but a separate filing. A formal complaint to the State Business Fraud Unit, with exhibits. 43 pages from Janet, plus 30 more from Graham's 10 days of work. He slid a copy to Daniel and a copy to the notary, who read the first page and quietly put her pen away. Graham explained, in the same flat professional cadence he had used with me, exactly what the documents contained. The administrative login access, the 11 emails, the holding company, the misrepresentation to Trident Capital, the timeline that tied the fraudulent filings to Daniel and Lauren's real estate commitments. Daniel said nothing for a very long time. Lauren said, with admirable composure, that she thought everyone needed to take a breath and that perhaps they should all consult their own attorneys before the conversation continued. Graham said that was a reasonable suggestion and that in the meantime, a temporary restraining order had been filed that morning, preventing any transfer of equity or signing authority in Clover & Co. Pending investigation. The TRO had been granted 2 hours before this meeting. You can't, Daniel started. It's already done, Graham said pleasantly. Somewhere across town, at that exact moment, Trident Capital was receiving notification from their compliance team that a fraud inquiry had been opened regarding the preliminary Clover & Co. term sheet. Their legal department would ultimately determine that the commitment was unenforceable because the person who had represented consent for it had done so through a forged communication. Trident Capital withdrew from the deal within 48 hours and referred the matter to their own fraud investigators. The development partner, who had been waiting on Daniel and Lauren's capital position, did not wait long before activating the default clause in their preliminary agreement. The financial exposure was significant. I found out about some of this in real time. Some of it came in pieces over the following weeks. Daniel and Lauren retained a defense attorney. The State Business Fraud Unit opened a formal investigation. The estate attorneys for our parents' holdings issued a letter confirming that any communications purporting to represent my position that had originated from the administrative login, which I had not authorized for that purpose, were legally invalid and unenforceable. My 50% stake in Clover & Co. was never touched. 3 weeks after the conference room meeting, Lauren posted something on social media. A photograph of a carefully arranged living room, soft lighting, 2 cups of coffee on a tray, with a caption about family being complicated and choices being hard and the importance of protecting what you love. The comments were full of warmth. People who knew her, people who didn't, offering sympathy for an implied difficulty that had no context. I read it once and closed the tab. I had learned something from watching the original video, the one about the woman whose sister had staged her at her mother's funeral and then live-streamed fake grief when the plan collapsed. What struck me then, and strikes me still, is how the most dangerous version of a lie is the one that gets posted before the truth can catch up. Lauren had understood that intuitively. Frame yourself as burdened first, and anything the other person does afterward looks like aggression. The difference, this time, was that I hadn't waited to be framed. I had walked into a room with 43 pages and a business litigation attorney and a temporary restraining order already in place. By the time Lauren reached for the narrative, there was no narrative left for her to control. Marcus texted me the night of the conference room meeting. Just 2 words. Thank you. I replied with 3. You did good. A week later, I took him to a Clover & Co. production run at the facility showed him the whole operation, the floor, the cold storage, the quality testing. He asked good questions. He paid attention. He reminded me, in his careful, observant way, of my father. I didn't know yet what the investigation would ultimately produce in terms of formal consequences for Daniel and Lauren. Graham said that outcome would likely take another year to resolve fully. What I knew was that the restructuring agreement had been invalidated, that Trident Capital had walked away, and that the development deal that had been the whole point of the scheme had collapsed under its own terms. Daniel sent me an email 3 weeks later, not through my business account, through my personal one, which he had no administrative access to. It was long. It used words like protect and concern and what's best for the company. It said that he had made choices he regretted and that family was complicated and that he hoped I would remember all the years before this one. It was, in its structure, an apology designed to function as a defense. I read it twice. I responded once, briefly. I said I had forwarded it to Graham for his records and that any further communication should go through legal channels. I did not feel the urge to explain myself. I did not feel the need to list everything he had done or enumerate my own grievances or make him understand what it had cost me to sit across a table from his careful, unreadable face and present him with the documentation of his own choices. Some part of me had expected to feel more, expected the confrontation to have more heat in it. But it turned out that when you've spent 10 days building a case file instead of rehearsing your anger, the anger itself quietly finds somewhere more useful to go. What I felt, mostly, was a settled, unglamorous clarity. The same kind I felt at the end of a long product development cycle, not triumph exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of a problem worked through correctly. Clover & Co. is still operating. We have not restructured. We brought in a fractional CFO to advise on sustainable growth strategy, and we renewed our distribution deal for another 3 years. The 18 employees still have their jobs. The suppliers my parents spent 20 years cultivating still get paid on time. I think about my mother sometimes, in the office she used to keep at the back of the main facility, with the photograph of the original farmer's market booth tacked to the wall above her desk. She used to say that the company wasn't really about the product. It was about the question of whether something you built with your hands could outlast you, whether what you made was worth more than what you could sell it for. She believed the answer was yes. She gave her life, more or less, to proving that it was. My brother saw a number on an appraisal and decided the answer was no. He decided that legacy was just a word people use when they don't have better options. I'm 31. I have better options, but I also have something he apparently doesn't, which is the patience to understand the difference between what a thing is worth and what someone will pay for it. Those two numbers are almost never the same. And the people who confuse them always, eventually, find that out. The last thing I did the night of the conference room meeting, after Janet and I had debriefed over cold coffee and Graham had gone home to type his notes into his case management system, was drive past the facility. I don't know exactly why. It was late. The parking lot was empty. The lights were off inside. Through the front window, I could see the front counter where my mother used to stand on Saturday mornings when she was still well enough to come in, arranging the small display of products they kept for walk-in customers. The photograph of the original booth was still there on the wall in her office, though I couldn't see it from where I was parked. I sat there for a few minutes and then I drove home. Some things are not about the money. And the people who forget that tend to discover it in the most expensive way possible.